Magnificent state occasion gently recedes into the background as the Queen's coffin makes its way now through London and out towards Windsor. Welcome to the splendour of Windsor Castle, the near 1,000-year-old home of royalty and the backdrop to many great battles and grand banquets. But today sees maybe its most momentous event, the burial of our longest reigning monarch, Queen Elizabeth II. The Queen will this afternoon finally be laid to rest in St George's Chapel alongside her beloved parents, sister and husband. So many days of grand public ceremony will come to an intimate ending as Her Majesty passes into history. We'll see the Queen's coffin making its journey towards Windsor and the committal service, which will be attended by the King, the rest of the royal family, and also Her Majesty's closest friends. Windsor Castle is certainly exquisitely grand and imposing, but it's also a place where the Queen, well then of course the little princess, played as a toddler on the lawn, found safety as a teenager during the Blitz, rode her ponies, nursed her children, walked her dogs. Having left her cherished home in the Scottish Highlands 11 days ago, today she will come to rest for eternity in the home that was so important it gave name to her family. Well, the town of Windsor is, of course, a major tourist destination. It's used to crowds, but today its streets have taken on a unique character. The grounds of the chapel and the edges of the Long Walk are carpeted with bouquets of flowers. And the thousands of visitors, some local and many more from far-flung corners of the globe, are quietly positioning themselves to take one last look at Her Majesty's coffin. David Dimbleby will be taking us through this afternoon's event.
I suppose the way to see this afternoon's service is that if what happened at Westminster Abbey was the grandeur of a state funeral with heads of state, with people from all over the world coming to pay tribute to Her late Majesty, what is going to happen here at Windsor this afternoon is much closer to a family funeral. As Kirsty was saying, the Queen is going to be interred here along with the Queen Mother, Prince Philip, the Duke of Edinburgh, Princess Margaret, and will lie with 10 other sovereigns going way back to Henry VI in 1471. So it is in that sense the sovereign coming back to the place where our sovereigns, or many of our sovereigns, lie. But on the other hand, the congregation is going to be very different here, as the people sitting here now are perfectly obvious. We're not in Westminster Abbey, they've assembled here, and they are a different kind of congregation, much smaller. They include, for instance, many of the Queen's godchildren. They include large numbers of people who worked on the Queen's estates, whether in Scotland or in Norfolk or in London. Some of them wearing, you see that little medal, the Royal Victorian Order, which several people here are wearing, and that's the order that's in the personal gift of the Queen, only given to people who have worked for her, and it's her decision whether they should have it. So what we'll see here is a quite different service, but with this momentous ending to it, which Hugh was talking about earlier on, the moment when the instruments of monarchy that were presented to her in Westminster Abbey at the coronation are removed from the top of the coffin and returned to those 3 cushions you can just see in the far distance on the altar of St George's Chapel. The banners, of course, here are of the Royal Order of the Garter, hanging splendidly all the way down. The Garter Knights, who each have to provide the banner, there are 24 of them in all, and members of the royal family as well. So this chapel not only serves the purpose of being the Chapel of Windsor, but also of the Order of the Garter, founded in 1348 by Edward III. So history here, just as in Westminster Abbey, history here is present for this momentous afternoon.
Well, I'm joined now in our studio by the very well-known face, the gardener and broadcaster, Alan Titchmarsh. Thank you very much for taking the time, especially since this is a personal day for you too, because you knew the Queen, you met her on very many occasions. What are your thoughts today as you've watched, as we've all watched, almost spellbound by some of those images?
I've been so moved, Kirsty, by the fact that we've all come together, as she said we would, and we must. And there's been this enormous sense of togetherness created for us by our late Majesty, the Queen. And the fact that the streets were so lined, that the Westminster Abbey was full of the great and the good, but we were there too, in spirit and in many thousands in person. And she has pulled us all together over the years, and I've felt also an enormous sense of continuity. We all thought, oh my goodness me, what will happen when the Queen goes? The Queen has gone, and yet we're still here. She would have wanted us to be. We now have a king who has taken up the reins seamlessly, spoken beautifully right the way through. And I feel safe. I feel as though we have all come together to say we're all right. You know, it will be okay. She gave us 70 years on the throne. We've learned from her. We will not disappoint her. We will carry on. We will be positive, and we will remember her with enormous fondness and respect.
I was wondering what you were making of, to me, although of course a state occasion, and indeed there will never be a grander one than that, but I was looking at the wreath on the coffin, so full of colour. I saw rosemaries, hydrangeas, there were dahlias, oak leaves. It seemed to me, it was a very, very personal touch, and I just wondered, you, with your gardener's eye, what you made of that.
Our history was in that wreath. There were oak leaves there. There are oak trees in Windsor Great Park that were growing here and were mature when William the Conqueror invaded in 1066. Some of them are still there, still alive. And it's Hearts of Oak, isn't it, that famous military song? The oak leaves, rosemary, as you say, for remembrance, English roses. And the Prince of Wales, as you know, as I know, is a great gardener. And it was his wreath there, his message on there to his mother, who was also a keener gardener than most people would realise.
I didn't know that. I didn't know she was a gardener.
She loved small flowers. Lily of the Valley was her favourite flower. She loved primroses. The sort of humble flowers in a way, rather like Queen Alexandra, who was Edward VII's queen. She liked what she called her poor little flowers, really small little flowers. And it was a great reminder that one of the lasting great legacies from the Queen was the Queen's green canopy.
Yes.
That carries on. It is of small consolation to me that the first words my sovereign ever spoke to me in 1985 at the Chelsea Flower Show, when I did a cottage garden, she said to me, first time she'd ever spoken, I'd ever met her, she said, your onions are very small. And she must have seen I was crestful. She went on to say, I like them small. When they're large, they taste of nothing at all.
She's quite right. Bracingly frank then. What about what she gave you your MBE when you got your MBE?
She did.
And people always say, well, you know, I don't really talk about what she said. Well, maybe now, maybe today is the day to talk about what she said. Well, what was the conversation?
Well, I'd had the great joy. It was 2000. It was the millennium, New Year on us. I'd been given the MBE. And in that January, when I knew I'd got it, I was asked to go to Sandringham to talk to the Sandringham WI. Only about 25 members and the Queen in the front row. And I remember standing up to address this AGM. The Queen was right in front of me, and I said, oh, man, we're awfully close, aren't we? And so she took over the table, the trestle table, and she said, yes, you pull, I'll push. And we moved the table. And then I had a lovely time. You know, when you can make the Queen laugh, or when you could make the Queen laugh, and she threw her head back, it was genuine laughter and the smile that we all know. And then when I came to my investiture in June, I thought, well, I wonder if she'll say anything about it. And I went up and went to my bow, and she said, are you busy? And I thought, I was a bit disappointed, you know, it was a bit general, but I thought, no, she sees a lot of people, she can't remember everything. And I told her what I was doing, television, writing. And at the end, the hand came out, and as she shook my hand, she said, well, she said, you give a lot of ladies a lot of pleasure.
She never did.
Well, I didn't really realise until somebody said what to me, said, what did she say? And I said, she said, what? And so I was going home in the car with my wife, and I said, you know, I couldn't make up my mind whether to be buried or cremated. I'd quite like to be buried because I'd like a headstone, and on me said, like Alan Titchmarsh, MBE, 1949 to whatever. He gave a lot of ladies a lot of pleasure, Elizabeth R.
Well, she wasn't wrong, was she, Alan?
No.
Extraordinarily, you saw, as he was then, Prince Charles, the night before he was about to become king. a normal night, a special? It must have presumably been a special night. Prince Charles was there.
It was at Dumfries House up in Ayrshire, and I've been an ambassador for the Prince's Trust and the Prince's Countryside Fund for a long time. I've also been, since its formation, an ambassador for the Prince's Foundation, which does a huge amount of work, and particularly up in that part of Scotland and around Dumfries House. 12,000 people a year learning all kinds of skills. And I was up there to have a look round, and I saw the Prince in the morning and ran across the ladder and said hello, and we had a quick chat, and he said, you know, perhaps you could do the estate walk with me tomorrow, which, as it turned out, I couldn't do, but it's another story, isn't it? We had a dinner in the evening, and it was relative, about 50 people there, so it was quite intimate. And after dinner, we had warm coffee, and we listened to music. There was a sort of penny whistle and a guitar. And the Prince gave the penny whistle player a bottle of scotch and the guitarist a bottle of champagne. And we all chatted, and at about 11 o'clock, the Prince was working his way around the room to leave. And I happened to be standing by the door, and he shook my hand. He said, "Come for tea sometime." I said, "Lovely. I've known him for a long time." And off he went to bed, and off I went to bed, and I got an early flight in the morning. When I got home, I realised that I'd said goodnight to the King on his last night as Prince of Wales. He had no inkling that night before that anything was untoward.
We're looking at pictures now of the Queen's coffin making its way, as I said, towards Windsor, and we can see there's hardly, well, there isn't a gap, really. People have come out from their homes, their places of work, if they happen to be working today on this bank holiday, and they are very much making their presence felt. And I think, well, we saw how deep the crowds were in central London. It's no surprise.
It's no surprise at all. It's wonderful that people want to be there, as all those hundreds of thousands who filed through Westminster Hall just wanted to be there, to pay their respects, to say thank you. It's a celebration of a life, as well as a mourning of a passing of a very, very important person to all of us.
Alan Titchmarsh, thank you very much for sharing your wonderful memories and your thoughts on such an important day.
Thank you.
People are gathering on the long walk. Anita Rani is there for us.
I was here last night, Kirsty, and a few people were gathering to bag their spots, to spend their night under the stars to make sure that they got a good position. And what a difference now. The crowds have amassed, all here with one common goal: to witness a moment in history, to watch the procession of Her Majesty the Queen's coffin make the final part of its journey along the Long Walk through to Windsor Castle via the Cambridge Gate, which is behind me. The crowds have come well prepared. They've come with picnics and blankets and chairs, and they've been watching the funeral service on screens that have been erected along the Long Walk. And during the service, it was pin drop silence. And then everybody rose to their feet during the national anthem. The atmosphere here is calm, it's contemplative, it's reflected, it's very peaceful. And the weather gods are smiling on us today. It was warm and overcast this morning, and now the sun has come out. And the people here are from all over the country, all walks of life, young and old, and locals from Windsor as well. Some of them who were lucky enough to meet the Queen, who was very much their neighbour, and I'll be hearing their stories a little bit later.
With me now, watching events unfold today, is the very eminent historian, Sir David Cannadine. We're very happy to have you here. Why Windsor? Why does it end here for Queen Elizabeth II?
It ends here because Windsor is the oldest residence, royal residence of the royal family, going back to Norman times. And more recently, and there's a long perspective here, it's the place where all British monarchs have been buried since George III. Most of them, not all of them, in the chapel here, but all of them within the wider curtilage of Windsor. So it is the place where monarchs finally come to rest. And in the sequence of monarchs, it's now Queen Elizabeth's turn.
Can we draw any conclusions from the fact? I think people very often, when they visit Windsor, when they think of Windsor, they think of Queen Victoria. They see the wonderful statue that's in the centre of Windsor, and of course the mausoleum is here, this grand mausoleum that was built near Frogmore Cottage. Yes, yeah. Near Frogmore. Our longest-serving monarch of 70 years doesn't seem to be doing anything that is quite as much of a statement as that. She will be laid to rest in the very intimate privacy of the family crypt. That tells us something about, or does it tell us something about her?
Well, Windsor Castle is a very multifunctional place. It's important to remember that. It began as a fortress, it's a royal home, it's where many members of the royal household work. It has a fabulous library and art collection, and it's a place of worship. So lots of things go on in Windsor, but one of the great things that goes on, which is why we're here today, is that this is where monarchs end their lives and are buried here. Queen Elizabeth, of course, herself had a strong personal connection with Windsor, probably stronger than many monarchs before her, so there are many reasons why it's very fitting that she ends here.
Do you think the strong connection particularly being the teenage years during the war, which really sort of cemented, would it be fair to say, cemented her relationship with the place?
I think it would. Of course, even before that, she spent weekends and time at Royal Lodge when her father was Duke of York, and that's where she acquired her love of country living and dogs and horses. But then, of course, she did live here with Princess Margaret during the Second World War. She made her first broadcast from here. And I think that was a very influential phase in her life. When she became monarch, she spent weekends here during the time that she was at Buckingham Palace during the week, and a variety of events are built around Windsor, the Garter ceremony, for example, Ascot Week. And of course a great deal of royal pageantry goes on here, state occasions when she welcomed people like President Obama or Donald Trump or Joe Biden. So she was very closely associated with here during her very long reign.
Can we think then about today as the moment when the Queen slips from being the person who was our monarch into history, as it were? You know, she is somebody who people will now be reading about. That's a very significant moment, of course, for her family and friends, but in a way it's a shared moment for all of us.
Yes, I think that's right, and in a way it's a moment that will actually linger. It is true that she is passing from being our queen, and most of us never knew the time when there was any other monarch. She has now passed into history. We have a new sovereign, King Charles III. But of course it's true, firstly, that I think many people will remember this day all their lives. But secondly, it's going to take quite a while for my colleagues, historians and biographers, to reach some settled verdict on many aspects of her reign. We know already it was a remarkable reign. She was a great monarch and was much loved. All of that we know and is settled. But how future generations, future historians will come to see her is, I think, something that will need a lot of work on going forward.
It is very interesting that she maintained entirely consistently, as I understand it, the popularity of the monarchy throughout her reign. The figures were always the same. You know, people very much liked her when she came to the throne and very much like her today. It's interesting that as times have changed, and in many ways, she was a monarch managing decline of an empire, decline of Britain's status in the world in so many ways, and yet every overseas paper that I got my hands on this morning, on its very front page was the fact that today was the state funeral of Queen Elizabeth II. It's interesting that there's a sort of tension between those two things, do you think?
Yes, I think that's right. It's clear that in many ways she presided over a period of de-imperialisation, for want of a better word.
It's a good word.
And de-Victorianisation, if you'd like that one as well. And part of her skill at managing that was that she never let on that that was what she was doing.
Yes.
And I think that was crucially important. Yet at the same time as those things were happening, she helped the monarchy adapt. Some thought too slowly, some thought too quickly. I think on the whole she called it right. And I think the recognition that she managed to sustain all of that over 70 years was a very extraordinary achievement. Just as is also the fact that, although we like to think to the contrary, over 70 years she sustained the fact that with very, very few exceptions, we never really knew what she thought about anything.
Isn't that true? And that's so often when I speak to people, indeed at the Jubilee I spoke to many people to try to get an insight, but I suppose it's understandable that somebody who was so constantly under scrutiny would want very firmly to keep part of their life private.
I think that's right, and the hope must be, I speak here of course as a historian, the hope must be that she did indeed keep a diary, which I think there is cause to suppose that she did, and let us hope that she expressed her views there trenchantly and candidly in a way that in public she very properly felt she couldn't.
So interesting to talk to you, Sir David Cannadine. Thank you very much indeed for taking the time to share your thoughts with us.
It's been a great pleasure and privilege.
Thank you.
on its way from London to Windsor. The coffin of the Queen carried past large crowds on each side of the road here. Quite extraordinary that in the centre of London people were kept away from the procession. They're making up for it by coming here in their thousands, not just here but at Windsor, down the Long Walk, on each side. This is the road that runs right the way down from the castle to a statue in the far distance. You can just see on the skyline of George III. And Queen Anne had it paved for a carriage. Each side, it looks as though those are flower beds. They're not flower beds. They're flowers that have been laid by the gardeners of Windsor, that have been brought here by thousands of people over the last few days. They've been coming up the hill to the castle, each carrying just a small bouquet, obeying orders, not having it wrapped in cellophane or anything like that, and placing them here, and then the gardeners putting them into a pattern so they look like a planted garden, with sunflowers particularly strong for this time of year. The gates at the bottom are the Cambridge Gate, and this part is private, and this is where the coffin will be brought up towards the castle itself. And when it reaches the top, the Queen, the King and other members of the royal family will join the coffin of the Queen and accompany it from the top of the castle, from the round tower, where the Royal Standard's now flying, not at half-mast. The Royal Standard never flies at half-mast. It's being hoisted to the top of the flagpole to show that King Charles has just arrived. It was at half-mast when it was the Union flag before, but it stays there while the King is present. And so they will walk down through to what's called the lower ward, to St. George's Chapel itself, where the service will take place. And as they come up that long walk, you'll hear a minute gun firing, just as it was in London. The Royal Horse Artillery firing a gun every minute, and 5 seconds after the gun fires, 2 bells ring. One from the chapel itself, just below the chapel, and the other a famous bell called the Sebastopol bell, which is captured in the Crimean War and only rings for moments like this. It last rang in 2002 for the death of the Queen Mother, and it rang again this week for the death of Her Majesty the Queen. So the route liners are in place. We're waiting now for the arrival of the coffin, and there will be a long procession past those thousands we saw on the Long Walk.
Well, someone who knows Windsor Great Park very well and was looking closely at those beautiful images is the equestrian event organiser Simon Brooks Ward. And it's not just the Great Park, but indeed the Queen herself that you knew very well and you worked closely with throughout the years on the Windsor Horse Show. You are going to the service today. You are that good a friend, and therefore we're very grateful that you've taken the time on what I'm sure is a very difficult day for you. What are your thoughts?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, I've been 1 or 2 interviews over the last week or so, and you know, every time I come away, I can't believe I'm talking in the past tense about the Queen. Even now, I have trouble thinking that the Queen has finally gone, and I hope that this afternoon there'll be time for reflection and a little bit of closure and also understanding it and grieving as well.
Over the past days, of course, what we hear so often is she was a country woman at heart, and we try to in a way get to the bottom of that, and one of the ways to unpack it, of course, is her relationship with horses, the equestrian fraternity. It all began with a little pony called, was it Peggy?
Peggy,
Tell me a bit about Peggy.
Well, Peggy is a little Shetland pony, and as we know, they can be either great or they can be really curmudgeonly, and I think Peggy was okay actually, but she had a really big instructor called Sybil Smith, who was one of these sort of redoubtable women who got the Queen riding and interested in ponies from the very beginning. And that connection, you know, with an animal like a horse or a pony, it doesn't matter whether you're a queen or a pauper or whatever, it's the connection, they don't know it, and the Queen had a wonderful connection with horses.
And I wonder maybe if that was really at the root of it, because horses and dogs, she loved horses and dogs, and of course they just met her on the same terms as they met any human being. You know, they weren't looking at the crown, they weren't looking at the orb and the sceptre, she was just another human being, and I wonder maybe if therein lay part of the attraction for her.
Absolutely, it was simple pleasures, and you know, when you're getting away from matters of state and you're dealing with your dogs or your horses or the surroundings that you're in, it was tremendously relaxing for the Queen, and that's what we saw at the Royal Windsor Horse Show. Absolutely, the total relaxation for the Queen to come down and see her horses and ponies, which she did for 79 years.
79 years?
Yeah.
She never missed one?
Never missed one, and was there most days. And recently, State Opening in Parliament happened on the Wednesday. Well, I don't know how the Queen did it, but the Queen took off the crown, the robes of state and everything else, and was here by lunchtime to see her ponies in the ring. It was amazing.
And she was a very accomplished horsewoman herself. Is it true, and I've read this and I've never been able to check it out with anybody else, I guess you're the person to ask, was she still riding her fell ponies into her early 90s?
Oh yes.
That's true?
Yes, it's true. And the Queen was a fantastic horsewoman and person, and I always say that nobody knows or knew as much about a horse or a pony than the Queen. She had an incredible encyclopedic memory about horses and what breeding lines and bloodlines and everything else.
So she loved them. Did they love her? Was the feeling mutual?
Oh yeah. We all knew that the Queen was not very tall, and sometimes these big horses are not well behaved. Sometimes, but with the Queen, she absolutely commanded them, and it was done because it was relaxed. She stood there, she stood her ground, and the Queen tended to have this relationship with it, which is extraordinary. It's almost horse whispering.
Really?
Yeah,
That's
it was amazing to see the Queen around horses.
June, of course, means Ascot, and she was a devoted attendee of Ascot. It's interesting to think about the work that she did. I mean, obviously, it was enjoyment for her, but she brought the racing fraternity really into the spotlight, and we have, I guess, the amount of overseas money and the people who are very interested and want to be part of horse racing because they associate it with something dignified and something wonderful, and they associate it with the monarchy. She did a lot for the industry of racing.
Industry of racing, industry of horses and ponies. I mean, the Queen didn't just have a horse and see it race. The Queen knew about its journey, you know, from foal to the winning post, and that gave a great sense of accomplishment and pleasure for the Queen. And it was the same with the horses and ponies. And I always say to people that there are rare breeds in ponies and horses, and she was responsible for saving at least 7 through her patronage and support, so that we now see today not only survive, but they're thriving as well, like the Highland pony.
Now, never mind winning the Gold Cup with Estimate in 2013. I hear she liked to win the rosettes at the Royal Windsor Horse Show. She was chuffed, was she, when she got one?
Really great pleasures. And I remember wandering up to the Queen, and she just stood there in her blue gilet and a headscarf and a sensible shoes and a tweed skirt.
Good woman.
And you know, so she's pretty incognito. And I remember wandering up to one ring, and she'd had a real sort of blue ribbon day, because you hauled out this load of rosettes out of her pocket and said, "Simon, look what I've won." And you know, she was so pleased, and her smile was radiant. And she put them on her dining room table every night. Every time she won a cup at Royal Windsor Horse Show or a rosette, she put it on the dining room table.
Simon Brooks Ward, we are very grateful for you sharing those wonderful, intimate memories. We will let you go now to St George's Chapel. Thank you very much for taking the time.
Thank you very much indeed.
I am with not just any old Windsor family, 6th generation Windsor family. Geoffrey, lovely to see you.
Thank you very much.
You're 90 now, but during the war, you got a very special invite to Windsor Castle, didn't you?
I did, yes, absolutely. I was invited
to go and see
the pantomime.
the pantomime.
Oh yes, yeah, the pantomime. I went to see the pantomime, which was absolutely amazing. It was fantastic.
How old were you?
I was 8 years of age.
8 years old. And who was in the pantomime?
The pantomime, well, I want to call them Princess Elizabeth and Princess Anne.
Margaret.
Princess Margaret.
We're with you. Well, there were princesses then.
Yeah, they were the princesses, that's right. Because it's a long time ago, but I think I'm probably the only person that's ever been to there, because I was taken, and I was so enthusiastic about it because it was so wonderful. I went round and picked up the programmes, and I talked to the princesses, and they talked to me.
What did you talk about? Do you remember?
Yes, they just said, hi, you know, what are you doing? How are you about? And I said, well, did you enjoy doing it? And they said, oh, absolutely, we loved it.
What a lovely, lovely memory and an
it was.
Experience. Can we see the mementos that you've got in your
surely.
hand? So what do we have here? We've got tickets
Yes.
to see Aladdin.
Yeah.
And a letter sent, and this is your tickets came in this letter. How did you manage to get the tickets?
Well, my parents knew the headmaster there
Of the Royal School.
who in fact produced the pantomimes.
And Andrew, you've been hearing these stories your whole life.
All my life, yes.
How special?
Incredibly special, and sort of rooted my father at such a young age to the whole Windsor royal connection.
And you've got your own royal connection as well, haven't you?
I
Tell us
do,
your
Anita.
story.
I am chairman of the Royal Windsor Rose and Horticultural Society, and the society was founded by Queen Victoria in 1893, and every sovereign since then has been our patron. Now, I'm not chairman because I'm a gardener. In fact, I know nothing about gardening or horticulture at all, but the society got in trouble about 10 years ago with no members, and I was approached because my grandfather had been involved, and I was asked if I would help them out. And I'm a businessman, so together with the small team, we've managed to, reignite the society.
And you took a bouquet to the Queen?
I did. In fact, the summer show, the Royal Windsor Flower Show, has a unique competition class, which is a floral table display that the winner gets. The table display goes up to Her Majesty's breakfast table. And so as chairman, my job is to go up to the Windsor Castle, knock on the door, present the floral display, say, Andrew Try, chairman of the Royal Windsor Rose and Horticultural Society, the floral display for Her Majesty's breakfast table.
And the Queen was there, and she actually invited you up to see the roses.
Exactly. So I was invited in.
Oh, wonderful.
I wasn't expecting it, and got to present the bouquet to the Queen.
Wonderful to hear both your stories. Thank you so much, Geoffrey and Andrew. Thank you.
Fantastic.
Thanks, Anita. There's a documentary in that. My next guest is the actress and writer Dame Maureen Lipman. Thank you very much for taking the time to join us. You were preparing to go on stage 11 days ago when you heard the news that stopped so many of us in our tracks. How did you react?
I had a premonition, Kirsty. I actually texted to a friend in Corrie. I think the Queen's going to die. Just had one of those strange experiences, and then I thought that the show would be cancelled. It was in Manchester, it was a one-woman show, and I didn't think anyone would play that night, but the directive came through that we were all to carry on. And all I can say is it's quite a harrowing show as well as humorous, but all I can say is it was very tender that night, because my reaction was immediately visceral. I just sobbed. And then literally the show had to go on.
You met the Queen, I mean, we talked about this at the Jubilee just a little bit. I mean, you met the Queen on six occasions. I mean, that's quite a lot of times to meet the Queen.
For a Hull girl.
Yes, especially for a Hull girl. How would you describe her when you go beyond what she very obviously was?
She's in her own skin. She's absolutely herself. She's a modest and a shy person, playing the part of somebody absolutely in charge of everything, as she was today.
Yes.
Because wasn't it beautifully?
Absolutely beautiful.
Beautifully directed. You, of course, are not in your own skin, so you're just basically burbling. And I've burbled my way through at least 6 or 7 occasions. And I suppose I remember particularly the night she came to Oklahoma, which was her favourite show because I think she saw it on honeymoon. And so we, the cast of Oklahoma, were all called in for a 10:30 rehearsal in the morning, which is pretty unheard of. We've been playing for 6 months, Hugh Jackman and all the rest of us. And she came in the morning and we erected a barn and sang, "Oh, the farmer and the cowman should be friends," you know. And then that night, she came to see the show. Lunchtime, we had a lunch with her at the Ivy, just a few of us. And I didn't get to speak to her because I wasn't next to her. But as I left, she said to me, "I believe you're coming to see us at the Palace quite soon." And I said, "Yes, Ma'am, if I can find something to wear," you know, normally witty riposte, you know, blah, blah, blah. And that was in November. And in February, in my nice outfit, I'd made my little bob, and she said, "Well, I see you found something."
She did not.
She did.
I think that's extraordinary.
It is. She was an extraordinary woman, and we've lost the mother yeast of our daily bread, is how I put it. We've lost...
Well, I say it's extraordinary, not to be rude. I mean, of course she'd remember who you were, but when you were meeting the sheer volume of people that she was meeting as Queen, that's why it's extraordinary.
I think that was her little consolation prize, that she did those things, because in a sense she knew that it was a more important meeting to us than it was to
inevitably,
her.
yes.
She was dazzling in every way and so photogenic. She couldn't take a bad photograph, could she?
She had the best, I only met her once, but the best skin I have ever seen. She was lit from within, I think.
She was, and she made that job into, you know, when you think of her courage, her sheer courage. Queen Victoria shut herself away for decades after the death of her beloved. She was out there again after a week, and the mundanity of the job, the boxes every day, you know, not like in The Crown, sort of, you know, from one crisis to another, just
ploughing through.
The ribbon cutting, the shaking of the hands. An incredible woman doing an incredible job for 70 years. It's just, she led by example, didn't she, like the best of teachers?
There is a wonderful phrase, and I think it might have been in Robert Hardman's book about, you know, she visited the places that needed visiting and she thanked the people that needed thanking. And in that way, she made herself real, and she made people who were doing the things that contribute to the fabric of society feel that they were special. Of course they are special, because those are the things that matter. But I think in one way it was that sort of dogged determination to go to the places that are not glamorous.
Absolutely.
That really was
the least
something,
snobbish of people, and the most courageous, because when you stand in an open-top car and you do walkabouts, which she really introduced, there's a lot of strange people out there. I'm sometimes frightened when people suddenly approach you the way they do. She was very brave. You know, think about the intruder and the horse that bolted, all those things. She was really a warrior.
Also interesting, I think, to look at the way that she aged. There seemed to, and very interestingly, you know, people like Barack Obama and Justin Trudeau talking about the wisdom that came with her, that when they were able to have conversations, it wasn't just that they were meeting a sovereign, it wasn't just they were meeting a fellow head of state, they were meeting somebody who had a kind of institutional memory that went back 70 years, and that was invaluable to them. There's a lot of wisdom that comes with that experience.
So much wisdom and so much discretion. If you remember the blue and yellow flowers that were discreetly behind her after Russia had invaded Ukraine, she had a way of making her point, I think, which was unique. You know.
Dame Maureen Lipman, thank you for sharing your memories and thoughts. It's so nice to see you today.
Lovely to see you too. Thank you.
The state hearse, still on its way, still with people on each side of the road, not going along the motorway, but coming through the ordinary main roads. It'll go through the town centres before it gets to Windsor. And at Windsor, in the chapel, much of the congregation already sitting waiting for this family funeral. People who were close to the Queen, worked for the Queen, many again with the Royal Victorian Order medal. And there'll be music played, but the service doesn't actually begin for another hour and a half, and that hour and a half will be taken up with the procession up the Long Walk. A procession very like the one we saw in London, with the pipes and the drums and the bands and all that sort of glorious jewel-like surrounding of the coffin as they come up the Long Walk and into this west door, under the huge window, one of the largest stained glass windows in Britain, and the coffin will be borne up the steps and into the nave. The music's going to be played. It's interesting, the music they're going to play. There's one particular composer who was the organist here at the chapel, who not only played the organ here, but has also provided music for the service itself. And he was here from the 30s until the 60s. The Queen herself used to go up into the organ loft there to listen to him play. And it's said that he actually taught Her Majesty the piano. Sir William Harris is called. But there's music also by Bach and Herbert Howells, Samuel Coleridge Taylor, modern music from Judith Weir, the current master of the King's Music, Elgar Vaughan Williams, all those famous British composers. But for the moment, it seems they sit in silence and just talk to each other. The banners of the Knights of the Garter. Now, interestingly, the 1000th Knight of the Garter, would you believe, was the Prince of Wales, who was Prince William then. He was appointed in 2008, the 1000th Knight of the Garter. It goes back centuries, and it's in the gift, or was in the gift of the sovereign, only given to people who've distinguished themselves in public life. Not all men. There are women, ladies of the Garter, they're called as well, and their banners hang here during their time when they're alive, when they come every year to this service here for the Garter, and then on their death the banner's taken down, but the seat that they have below in the choir, those brass plaques you can see, are there to commemorate their time as members of the order. There are 700 or 800 of them left here. Some have been taken down because history disapproved of them, others have just fallen down, but otherwise this extraordinary panoply of the Knights of the Garter, whose chapel this is. And the man responsible for all this is the most senior herald, Garter King of Arms, who made the principal proclamation of the King in St. James's Palace earlier this week, and here today will perform one of his final duties, which is to read out the Queen's styles and titles at the very end of the service. Garter King of Arms, and with the heralds, who nowadays play a mainly symbolic role at state occasions, but in the past were figures of controversy who had to decide who was entitled to call themselves what and who owned what land, and got caught up in all kinds of shenanigans. But now, as so many of the people that we see in the most brilliant colours here enlivening these occasions, is actually there simply as a formal role which they play.
Now, someone who knows Windsor very well is the writer and historian William Shawcross. He's taken the time to join us. We're very grateful for that. You've spent a lot of time here. Sometimes it's been social times and sometimes it's been working times. We'll come to that in a second. But today, as somebody who spent a lot of time in the company of the Queen, what are your thoughts?
Well, I don't want to exaggerate and boast and say it was a lot, but I had an incredible honour from the Queen. She asked me to write the official biography of her mother.
And there was a 6-year period where you researched and wrote that.
Much of that time in this wonderful castle, in the round tower behind us, which is where the Royal Archives are.
Right.
And it was an extraordinary joy to read all these letters that had never been written, probably since they were never been read for 50, 60 years.
But didn't you spend time consulting with the Queen and saying, this is what I've found and what do you make of that, and is that accurate? So you would take tea with her and you would exchange your research and ask for her opinion?
Yes, she would ask me to tea either here or sometimes at Balmoral if that was, my wife and I went to stay there several times. But you're right, and I would say, look at this letter, ma'am, do you remember this? And she would say, oh yes, this is why I wrote that, or this is why my mother wrote this to me, or to so-and-so. So I got to know her. I was, as I say, very privileged, and I'm lucky to do so.
I mean, you're a very distinguished writer, but that must have been quite nerve-wracking.
It was, but nerve-wracking in theory, but actually the first time after I'd met her, I realized what an extraordinarily kind and gentle person she was, and she always put everybody at their ease. There was never any side to her. It was always gentle and wise and incredibly decent in every sense of the word.
So you had access to this archive, and there were letters between the Queen and the very young Queen and the Queen Mother. I need to ask you a question that has been bothering me because I've read it in 2 or 3 books, which is, during the war, did the Queen Mother sign her letters tinkety-tonk old fruit and down with the Nazis?
She did.
She did?
She did. She didn't sign all her letters like that.
Okay.
If she was writing to the Queen, to Princess Elizabeth, she would say, with much love from your loving mamma.
Right.
But to friends and cousins, not all of them, and certainly not to a formal letter, she would say, tinkety-tonk and down with the Nazis.
Right.
And she had this wonderful habit of raising her glass to people she loved and say, let's now drink to Winston Churchill. And then raise our glasses to Winston Churchill, and let's lower our glasses to the Nazis. And others.
When you were a house guest, you say both here at Windsor, overnight stay, what were they called? Dine and sleeps, I think.
Dine and sleep.
Very posh sleepover.
Yeah, yes, very posh, of course. Being asked to sleep here is very posh. One of the other guests who was there the night that my wife and I were here had a canaletto in his bedroom. Well, that's pretty posh.
That is pretty posh. Right.
And beautiful.
And those events, I mean, I imagine, of course, because you already had this working relationship, not entirely nerve-wracking, but, you know, you have to be careful to do and say the right thing. Notoriously, we have heard throughout this week that the Queen was the consummate hostess, that she worked very hard to put her house guests at their ease. Did you experience that?
Absolutely. There was one classic occasion when my wife and I were coming to stay the night, or the weekend actually, and the British Airways lost my wife's luggage. So she was crestfallen, as you can imagine.
I can.
But we arrived, and the Queen came to the door and said, I hear you've lost your luggage. I'm terribly sorry. But I've tried to arrange with the other ladies' guests and ladies in waiting and others to find some clothes for you. And so they did. And my wife had a very nice shirt from a lady in waiting, and a skirt from someone else, and a beautiful belt from a Polish maid.
Wonderful.
So it was fantastic.
Tell me then what your thoughts were today when you were watching the service, and not necessarily what do you expect them to be, but what is your sort of state of mind as somebody who is saying goodbye to somebody who was dear to them and who they knew?
I think the whole thing has been quite astonishingly beautiful and emotional, not just for me, but I think the emotion of the whole country has been extraordinary to see over the last week. It's because people loved her. She'd been here for 70 years, and she loved us. And what you've seen, I think, is a mixture of grief and gratitude on the part of the people in this last 7 days, and it's just fantastic, and it's very, very well deserved. The other thing, I think, which was mentioned several times in the service by the Archbishop and others, is that the Queen didn't think this was the end. She believes in resurrection. And I found, when I was doing my research, a lovely remark that she made in a speech in Australia, an Aboriginal proverb, which she said was enduring. And the proverb said, we are in this time and place for a short time, to learn, to observe, to love, and then we go home.
It's a beautiful thought. William Shawcross, we thank you very much for sharing your memories and sharing all your thoughts, and it was very interesting to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Now, to be chosen as the Sovereign's Piper is a great honour. Anita, I think, is joined now by somebody who has held that role. Anita.
Yes, I'm with Jim Motherwell, who was appointed Piper to the Sovereign in 1997. What does that mean, Jim? What was the job?
The role of the job, you play the bagpipes every morning underneath the Queen's window from 9 till 9:15. Then you pack them away. Then you go and collect the Queen when she comes down from her private apartments at the lift, and you just stay with her, regarding what she's doing, interviews, visits, investitures. You basically work all day with her. And then when you're finished, you take her back round to the lift and she goes back upstairs to a private apartment.
What an incredible job to have.
It was very surreal.
Every single day you would play a tune on the bagpipe, same tune every day?
No, you not to repeat the tunes all week, and you get a lot of tunes into 15 minutes on the bagpipes.
Did you ever get requests?
Yeah, the Queen's got her favourite tunes, a lot of them. A couple that Pipe Major Burns, who's the present Queen's Piper, played today. And she used to ask for a tune called Dovecote Park because she remembered it from she was a princess at the end of the war.
And then you go up to Balmoral as well?
Balmoral's the best part of the year because I've got loads of duties, or I had loads of duties to do at Buckingham Palace. But once you get up to Balmoral, you play the bagpipes in the morning, you play at dinner in the evening, and during the day you would go out horse riding, shooting, practicing your military training in case you ended up back in the regiment.
Not a bad life.
Yeah,
now,
okay.
one of the most poignant moments in the funeral service was when the piper played.
Oh, that was for me big time because the piper, Pipe Major Paul Burns, he's a very good player, but he's young and he's. I remember what that feeling was like, and I was more nervous for him today than I was when I played the Queen Mother out the church when she passed away nearly 20 years ago.
He did an amazing job, though.
He did a fantastic job.
So if I were to ask you one enduring memory of the Queen, what would it be?
My wife was hurt in an accident at work in London, and she was quite badly hurt. And I had to take time off, compassionate time off, and then when I went back to work, the Queen asked how my wife was and how she was coping. And I said, there's no long-term injuries, but she's covered in bruises. So the Queen said, wait there. She went back upstairs in the lift, came back down and gave me a little bottle of Anika to put on my wife's bruises. So Trish was very happy with that.
Such compassion.
Yeah, that's the word, compassion. She's a very compassionate lady.
Well, it's been a real pleasure to hear your memories. And what does it mean to be here today, Jim?
Oh, it's very special. I mean, when I saw on the news and the TV that the Queen had died, that's all it said, the Queen dies. I could feel the tears welling up in my eyes. But this is lovely doing this, seeing all this, the pageantry. It just brings my job back into the forefront of my head again.
Jim, thank you very much.
You are very welcome.
Beautiful memories. Well, there is a unique bond between the monarch and the armed forces, of course. To tell us more, I am joined by Sir Sebastian Roberts, former Major General of the Household Division, and Sir David Cannadine has joined us again. Thank you to you both. Sir Sebastian, if I can come to you first of all, what are your thoughts on a day like today?
Well, as you just said, there is a unique bond between the armed forces and the monarchy and the monarch. And I think for all of us who've had the honour to serve our Queen, our King and country, that bond is special. I think, of course, at the same time, that we all, at the time of a funeral, we're on the brink of eternity. We're on that moment that will come to all of us, and which in the military one I suppose confronts by virtue of one's service, one's own mortality and that of others. And I think we always knew that the Queen, as part of her service, had a great consciousness of the eternal verities, the things that do face us all, at the same time as being a deeply human individual. And that was the other side of being fortunate enough to be a guardsman, that one had the opportunity quite often to see the deep humanity, the person, as well as the image that we all knew and served.
And how did that display itself? When did you see it at its greatest?
In so many ways and on so many occasions. I can remember here in Windsor, 1 year after the grand military horse race meeting at Sandown, the Queen followed her mother, Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, in giving a party afterwards. And 1 year, several people who had been badly wounded in Afghanistan were invited. And I found myself going in with another member of my regiment, Guardsman Mina, who had just lost both legs and an arm a couple of months earlier. And when he was presented to the Queen next to me, she said, if you're not able to go on serving in my Irish Guards, what will you do? And he said, it doesn't really matter, ma'am, as long as it's serving people less well off than myself. And, well, as you can perhaps imagine, her eyes filled with tears. And one realised that any mask was easily laid aside.
And of course she came from a military family through
Indeed.
and through. She understood the military in a way that was not simply ceremonial and part of her role as sovereign.
Yeah, absolutely. She certainly felt, I think, at ease with people who had made the same sort of commitment as she had as a young woman. She joined the army, as we all know, in the Second World War, and then found herself with intimate connections to the armed forces, for a start, being the child and the wife of a serving naval officer. I think it's well known how much she enjoyed her life before she became queen as a naval wife. And I think she so deeply appreciated being surrounded by people who had made that oath of allegiance, which, if you like, binds one to being circumspect, but also sharing those values which she so clearly embodied. Selfless commitment, duty, all those things. I think she clearly lived by and liked being among people who had made the same commitment.
David Cannadine, we are hearing, and I'm sure viewers are hearing it too, the splendid sound, and maybe people can also enjoy the sight of the military as they are marching through and around St Giles Cathedral. And we might think for a moment about some of the ceremonial that is going to take place today. There will be the laying of the colours at the feet of the Queen's coffin and a little more besides. Can you explain a little of that?
Well, we've already seen a great deal of military involvement in the funeral so far. And the sense that the funeral of a reigning monarch is in many ways a military funeral dates back in its modern guise to Queen Victoria's time. She wanted a military funeral. She took great pride in being a soldier's daughter. And the gun carriage, which is of course an essential part of what we've seen today, signifies that. It's also the case that because of the slight hitch, to put it no more strongly, in Queen Victoria's funeral, the horses were taken out because they threatened to bolt. And Prince Louis of Battenberg summoned naval ratings to pull the gun carriage up to here. And so the tradition of state funerals having a gun carriage pulled by naval ratings dates back to then, and is a further aspect of the military nature of these last rites of a sovereign, who, as Sebastian has pointed out, is of course the head of the armed services.
And we will see something today called, now I hope I get this right, is it called the breaking of the wand?
We shall indeed see the breaking of the wand.
It sounds unlikely, that phrase.
Unlikely.
Can you tell me what it means?
Well, in the first place, we will never have seen this before because no committal or funeral service of a reigning monarch that has taken place at St George's Chapel, Windsor, has ever before been televised. So we shall see the Lord Chamberlain breaking his wand for the first time ever. The Lord Chamberlain has a wand. It's a long staff because in the old days he was the presiding person at court events, and courtiers tended to misbehave and talk rather more loudly than I suspect they do today, and in order to call for appropriate silence he used to bang the wand on the floor, and that was the purpose of having the wand. And what has been traditional for a very long time is that with the death of a sovereign and the service here, at the end of that service the Lord Chamberlain breaks the wand to signify the ending of one reign and I suppose the beginning of another. So we will see that later today.
For the first time ever.
For the first time ever.
Thank you so much for sharing that, and Sir Sebastian, thank you too for sharing your memories. Lovely to hear them.
And it has to be said, the wand is actually buried with the Queen's coffin. So we'll see it as the coffin disappears from sight in St George's Chapel. The route that the procession will take, lined with the guards here, but also with the Royal Navy, the Royal Marines, the Army and the Royal Air Force. A band of the guards, a new band coming in here to play. The guards divisions, the Grenadiers, the Coldstream, the Irish, the Welsh and the Scots are all present here. Now the liners are all the way down this long walk. You could see them just fading into the distance. And the coffin will arrive at the far end there and then come up in this procession at the slow walk. The RAF musicians, the Royal College, Royal Air Force College at Cranwell, all the guards lined here, they were all out here on Saturday morning in the pitch dark rehearsing this. And the Royal Hearse, in the meantime, is about 7 minutes away from us, I think. It's past Runnymede, and it's on its way to Windsor, still with people on either side of the street. I'm sure when it actually gets closer to Windsor, judging by the crowds that they've been at Windsor, there'll be thousands more people to greet it. Close to the River Thames as it comes through towards Windsor itself. The tradition of throwing flowers into the road began, I think, with the funeral of Princess Diana, when, you may remember, as you can see on the Royal Hearse now, flowers on the bonnet. There were flowers on the windscreen that had to be wiped away with windscreen wipers. So as we wait for the hearse to come to the castle grounds itself, and then the start of the full procession, let's just get back for a moment to Kirsty.
Joining me now is Bishop Rachel Treweek. Thank you very much for taking the time to join us. I understand you had, now I was reading my notes and it said an audience with Her Majesty when you were taking up your new role. I think that sounds like a terrifying phrase. What was the briefing? How did it go?
Yes, every bishop, when they become a diocesan bishop, goes to pay homage to Her Majesty.
Right.
So go to Buckingham Palace and go into the palace and meet with her and kneel before her. And she put her hands over my hands and I swore allegiance to her.
And how did you have a flutter of nerves? Was it a conversation?
Terrifying.
Were you briefed before? Did they say, this is where you stand?
Yes, I think the thing with me was I was the first female bishop she'd ever received.
Ah.
And so as I stood outside the door, there was a bit of fluttering about whether I should curtsy or bow wearing my robes. And then there came that moment when I was told that I would need to kiss the Bible. The Bible was on a cushion, opened at a verse I'd chosen, and they said, you'll need to kiss the Bible at the appropriate moment. And I said, I can't possibly do that. And people looked at one another rather worried, as if there was some theological reason why I couldn't do that. And I simply said, I'm wearing lipstick. So that was the first time that had happened. So I was asked to put my nose into it.
You were a house guest at Sandringham as well, and I've been talking to guests today about, yes, I mean, that is, I suppose, not only an honour and a treat, but a slightly nerve-wracking set of circumstances. How did you find it?
Yes, and indeed, as a bishop, you're not there as a house guest, you're there as a member of the Queen's household at that time. You're there to preach at Sandringham on the Sunday. And again, a very nerve-wracking experience, but as we've heard so often in recent days, Her late Majesty Queen Elizabeth was amazing at making you feel very at home. And I particularly remember her sitting at her card table, playing Patience and sitting next to her. And it really put one at your ease because you weren't looking eye to eye like this. She was looking down, playing cards and talking. And it was a wonderful thing that she did to make you feel at home.
Something that we've heard very often people saying over the last 10, 11 days is that they felt that the Queen, for 70 years or however many years they had been alive, was this constant, this reassuring presence that was constantly there, that represented continuity. So she did that for the hundreds of thousands of people who queued to see her lying in state. She did it for the millions who watched the Lying in State online. I was thinking about where she got her reassurance from and where she got her continuity from, and I'm imagining the answer to that might be her faith, because we are told time and time again that that was absolutely central to who she was.
Absolutely. She was rooted and grounded in her faith in Jesus Christ. And it's interesting you saying, Kirsty, about that constant presence, because even in death, she has been constant till now. People watching the coffin at this very moment, people, thousands of people queuing to be even in her presence in death. And of course now, as we come to the committal, we are acknowledging that that presence will be no more, that we are letting go, but we are letting go of her into eternal life with God. And she believed that, and as a follower of Jesus Christ, I believe that. And I think there's that thing that's been acknowledged again and again about her referring to Christ as the one who came to earth not to be served but to serve. And her service has been noted again and again, and that ability she had to make every person feel very special in that moment. And I would say that's because she knew that her sovereignty was bestowed upon her by God, and yet she was a human being.
Studying much of what she said, and particularly in her Christmas messages, she seemed, as she grew older, to be, I think, bolder about stating her faith and talking about it more openly. Is that something you discerned? Did you feel that? Even though it was always with her, one gets the feeling that she sort of thought, well, I'm not necessarily going to listen to the advisors who might say that's a turn-off, and it is a turn-off for plenty of people. I'm going to simply tell it like it is.
Yes, I think that's true, that she was confident in sharing her faith. Perhaps that did get stronger as she got older, but that sense that she was rooted and grounded in her faith in Jesus Christ, and yet wanted to be there for all people, and people of all faith and no faith. And that sense that she knew that every human being, she believed, as I believe, is created in the image of God and was unique and precious.
We're going to witness again, as we have done day in, day out over the past 11 days, the ritualizing of grief, that somehow that is the thing that the Church has seemed to give us through this period, where we are wondering about what we feel, wondering how we can mark the importance of this momentous passing. The Church has in a way come into its own in that respect, and it has said to us, well, you might be a believer, you might not be a believer, but this is the way we can make sense of a very difficult situation.
Yes, and I would say that in death the Queen has served us, because her death has enabled us to really allow our own stories to resonate with this national story of grief and mourning. Over these last few days, her death has held that space. And I would say, if we see all the flowers, the tributes, people queuing up for hours to pay respects to her, there's something about people's own stories, their own grief, their own pain, being allowed to come to the fore. And today, in this committal service, there will be that finality, that letting go. And I think in that moment, we will acknowledge all the different losses. People will, in their own stories, acknowledge the different losses, their own grief, for friends, for family, things in life that people had wished had been. And that space will be held as we let go of Her late Majesty Queen Elizabeth II, and as we allow our own pain and our own stories to be held in that moment.
That's such an interesting thought, because that really is essentially about the thing that the Queen relentlessly promoted throughout her life, which was community. That actually community comes together in the good times, but it also comes together in the difficult times. And many people who've spoken about their feelings regarding the Queen's death have said that it reminds me of when.
Yes.
And that seems to have been an important part of this whole 11 days as well.
Absolutely, about community, about the fact that as unique individuals we do belong together. That's also central to Christian faith, that actually the body of Christ we talk about. And in her life and in her death, people are being drawn together. And my hope and prayer is that our remembering won't be mere nostalgia,
Yes.
but that it will change us. That as we gather and as we watch this committal service, that each person will ask, what does this mean to me? What will my life be because of this?
That's very interesting. Is that then what you think, because my final question to you really was going to be, I was going to ask you what you think the legacy of this monarch will be. Is that it?
I hope that her faith will be remembered, that it will live on. I hope that it will make people curious. I hope people will be curious about faith, and I hope that that legacy will be that in our differences we come together. So often in our world, we live in a world where difference divides people, and at the heart of the Christian message is we might have differences, but we move towards one another in our differences.
Thank you very much, the Right Reverend Rachel Treweek. Very interesting to talk to you and hear your reflections. Thank you very much.